Carl Jung identified 5 profound signs that suggest you're being protected by a higher power. Imagine if your entire life had been quietly guided, without you even realizing it. Missed calls that kept you safe, vivid dreams, intuitive gut feelings, none of it random. Jung believed in the self, a divine force within the unconscious that shields and shapes us. In this video, we'll explore 5 undeniable signs of inner protection, not from the heavens, but from the depths of your own psyche. Stay with us. Part 1. Understanding divine protection through depth psychology. In Jungian psychology, protection by a higher power isn't rooted in religion. It's a psychological truth. It's an archetypal experience arising from the collective unconscious. Jung observed that people across all cultures report a sense of being guided or saved by an unseen force. This force isn't necessarily a traditional god, but an expression of what Jung called the self, the center of our inner wholeness. From this view, protection isn't external. It emerges when the ego, our conscious mind, aligns with the unconscious. Dreams, synchronicities, and intuitive moments often carry deeper truths. When in tune with this inner world, life begins to show order within chaos, and guidance seems to come from nowhere. Jung called this a numinous experience, borrowed from theologian Rudolf Otto, meaning a deeply sacred or awe-filled moment. Numinous experiences spark reverence and remind us of the sacred in ordinary life. They aren't dismissed as delusions in depth psychology. They're honored as signs the psyche is seeking harmony. Jung saw the unconscious not only as a place of trauma, but as a reservoir of wisdom and spiritual insight. When we integrate it, we move toward individuation, becoming whole. True protection, then, is a result of this integration. When ego and unconscious are divided, life feels chaotic and dangerous. But through deep inner work, processing pain, dreams, and inner conflicts, patterns emerge. And in those patterns, we find protection, not as avoidance of pain, but through meaningful suffering. Jung emphasized the role of archetypes, universal symbols like the wise elder or protector. When people feel watched over, they often associate it with these figures: Jesus, Mary, angels, ancestors. But Jung warned, don't confuse the symbol for the source. These images help the ego access the self's power, especially in dreams. For example, someone may dream of a glowing protector during hardship. That's not fantasy. It's the self stepping in to defend the psyche. This distinction matters: ego-driven control versus surrender to the self. Jung believed we're safer not through control, but by surrendering to life's inner rhythm. True safety arises in surrender. When we align with the self, synchronicities occur. Small decisions that avert disaster, near misses that seem fated. Jung didn't call it luck. He called it synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. Consider one case. A woman dreamt of a collapsing house, rescued each time by a stranger. In life, she was in a toxic relationship. That dream stranger was her animus, the inner masculine, guiding her to action. After leaving the relationship, the dream stopped. The self had protected her through symbolism. Protection isn't always dramatic. It might be a gut feeling, a cancelled plan, or the courage to let go. The unconscious is always communicating. Jung believed modern culture mocks divine protection because ego dominates. But protection in depth psychology isn't superstition. It's wholeness. It's the self-restoring balance through what Jung called the transcendent function, the bridge between ego and unconscious. Carl Jung outlined 5 powerful signs that you're being watched over by a higher force. Imagine if your whole life had been guided, without your conscious awareness. The missed opportunities, uncanny dreams, gut instincts that seemed to protect you, they weren't just coincidences. Jung believed in the self, a divine core within that steers, protects, and shapes you from the depths of the unconscious. In this video, we'll uncover 5 compelling signs that suggest you are indeed under the care of a higher power. Not one above you, but one within. Let's begin. Part 1. The idea of divine protection in depth psychology. In Jungian thought, the sense of being protected by a greater force isn't merely a religious belief or blind faith. It's an archetypal reality woven into the fabric of the collective unconscious. Jung saw that throughout time and cultures, people consistently speak of being guided or saved by an unseen presence. This protector isn't necessarily the religious god, but rather a reflection of the self, Jung's term for the internal organizing force that strives for psychic wholeness. In depth psychology, this sense of divine protection doesn't originate outside of us. It arises internally. It's activated when the ego, or conscious self, aligns with the deeper truths hidden in the unconscious. These truths often surface as symbols in dreams, synchronicities, or intuition. When you're attuned to this inner wisdom, you may feel a sense of purpose even in chaos and protection that defies logic. Jung described this as a numinous experience, a term borrowed from Rudolf Otto, describing awe-inspiring encounters with the sacred. A numinous moment evokes deep reverence or the sense of a divine presence. It's the feeling that something holy is near, even in your darkest times. When someone feels shielded by a higher power, they are often in contact with this numinous energy through the architecture of the psyche. In Jungian psychology, these experiences aren't dismissed as fantasy. They are taken seriously as the psyche's way of restoring inner equilibrium. The unconscious, Jung asserted, isn't just where we store repressed memories. It's also a source of spiritual truth and creative insight. When we stop suppressing the unconscious and integrate it, we move toward individuation, the journey to become whole. In this light, divine protection is not an external force, but the natural result of the ego aligning with the self. When the ego is isolated, life can feel fragmented and unsafe. But as one explores inward, especially through pain, dreams, and inner struggle, a change begins. Suddenly, there's a sense of order in life's unfolding, even when suffering is present. Protection doesn't mean the end of pain. It means pain becomes meaningful. That's where true protection begins, in the understanding that hardship is part of a larger intentional design. Jung also highlighted archetypes, universal symbols like the wise old man, the hero, or the mother, that help us feel protected. People often project their sense of divine care onto these figures, such as angels, ancestors, or spiritual icons. But Jung cautioned, don't confuse the archetype with the divine itself. These figures are not the source. They're interfaces that allow the ego to connect with the sacred. A person in crisis might dream of a light or protector. While symbolic, such dreams reflect real psychic intervention. The self is working to preserve the person's wholeness. This brings us to a major point in Jung's thinking, the contrast between ego control and surrender to the self. Most people try to control life to feel secure. But Jung saw this as illusion. True safety comes not from control, but from tuning into the deeper rhythm of the psyche. When people surrender to the self, they often witness uncanny events, synchronicities that guide and shield them. Jung documented stories of people narrowly avoiding disaster through what seemed like small, trivial choices. These weren't luck. Jung called them synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that reveal a causal order. It's as though the unconscious is speaking directly, warning and guiding. One case involved a woman who dreamed repeatedly of escaping a collapsing house with the help of a stranger. In real life, she was in a toxic relationship, damaging her mental health. The dream stranger was her animus, her inner masculine principle representing logic and action. These dreams weren't just warnings, they were protection. She left the relationship and the dreams stopped. Her psyche had used symbolism to keep her safe. Protection, then, isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a gut feeling that tells you not to go somewhere, or a sudden decision that keeps you from danger, or an inner realization that it's time to leave a job or relationship. All of this is the unconscious speaking, if you're open to listen. In modern times, we often laugh off divine protection. But Jung argued this rejection stems from an ego that refuses to face life's deeper mysteries. The more the ego tries to explain and control everything, the more it disconnects from the unconscious. And in that disconnection lies true danger, spiritual fragmentation. Depth psychology redefines divine protection not as superstition, but as psycho-spiritual alignment, a harmony between your conscious self and your deeper hidden truths. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychic mechanism that reconciles opposites to bring about healing and transformation. Feeling protected doesn't mean life is free of pain. Jung emphasized that struggle is necessary for growth. But there's a key difference between pain with purpose and pain without it. When you're protected, suffering becomes the very fire that shapes your soul. Protection often only becomes clear after the storm has passed. What once seemed like disaster, a job loss, betrayal, illness, can later be seen as necessary. These are not empty phrases. They are real psychological truths revealed when the ego lets go and the self takes the lead. To be protected by a higher power, in Jung's view, is to live in a story larger than your conscious mind can write. This trust isn't rooted in belief, but in experience. It grows through dreams, active imagination, shadow work, and deep inner reflection. With time, patterns begin to emerge. A hidden grace reveals itself. The self becomes not just an idea, but a lived presence. For Jung, this self wasn't just symbolic, it was divine, a spark of the divine that unfolds in every person. When the ego and self align, life takes on a sacred rhythm. You begin to feel guided, protected, and deeply purposeful. This isn't philosophy, it's a lived reality. And for Jung, it marked the heart of psychological health. Part 2, Sign 1. Synchronicity appears frequently in your life. One of the clearest signs that you're under a higher power's protection, according to Jung, is frequent synchronicity. These aren't regular coincidences. They're extraordinary moments when your inner state is reflected in the outer world in ways that defy logic. Jung saw synchronicity as evidence of an underlying order hidden beneath life's chaos. Many people who experience this report a sense that life is speaking to them. For Jung, this wasn't delusion. It was the self communicating with the ego through symbolic language. Synchronicity bypasses rational thinking and speaks straight to the soul through meaning-rich moments. Jung shared a striking example. A woman in therapy told him about a dream of a golden scarab, a beetle symbolizing rebirth. Just then, a beetle of that kind tapped at the window. Jung caught it and gave it to her. That act broke her rigid mindset. It was synchronicity in motion, a perfect outer reflection of inner change. When you're under divine protection, your life may be filled with such occurrences. You think of someone and they call. You're ready to give up, and a stranger offers the perfect encouragement. You change plans at the last moment and avoid unseen danger. These aren't flukes, they are messages from the self. Synchronicity isn't about proving the divine through science. It's about sensing meaning when the inner and outer worlds align. The more in touch you are with your inner truth, the more often synchronicities occur. This isn't superstition, it's alignment. When your conscious self opens to unconscious truths, you begin to see the hidden patterns that were always there. People report that synchronicities surge during crisis, transformation, or awakening. These are times when the ego is raw and vulnerable, perfect moments for the self to break through with signs of reassurance and guidance. Jung believed the self doesn't dictate every choice, but acts as a compass, keeping you oriented toward growth. When you drift from your true path, your psyche will create discomfort, symbolic dreams, or even illness to steer you back. But when you're aligned, synchronicities flourish. They're green lights on your spiritual path. Take the case of a man amid a divorce who kept seeing 111 feathers and doorways in dreams. At first he dismissed them, but then he couldn't ignore the pattern. Protection often comes after the crisis. In hindsight, what once felt like abandonment or destruction is revealed as protection in disguise. The job loss that shattered you made space for your life's true work. The betrayal that broke you showed the false foundation you'd built upon. The illness that drained your body awakened your soul. These are not cliches, they're psychological truths, truths that emerge only when the ego steps back and the deeper self steps forward. To be protected by a higher power, in Jung's view, is to participate in a sacred narrative, one the ego may never fully grasp. True trust doesn't come from dogma. It comes from living experience, from deep engagement with your own psyche. Dream work, shadow integration, active imagination, radical self-inquiry. Over time, a pattern emerges, a pattern of grace within the chaos, a quiet hand shaping your becoming. Jung saw the self as the bridge between the human and the divine. It's not just a psychological construct, it's the image of God within you. And when the ego aligns with that self, life stops feeling random. You begin to sense a sacred rhythm, a guiding intelligence, a deeper purpose. And this is not belief, it's experience. For Jung, that experience is the foundation of true psychological wholeness. Part 2. Sign 1. Synchronicity happens constantly in your life. One of the most powerful signs that you're protected by a higher power, according to Carl Jung, is synchronicity. Those uncanny coincidences that feel anything but random. They defy logic. They align perfectly with your inner world. And they speak directly to your soul. Jung called synchronicity a causal connecting principle. He believed it pointed to a hidden order behind what appears to be chaos. People who experience frequent synchronicities often say, "It feels like the universe is speaking." And in Jungian psychology, it is. It's how the self, the deeper wisdom within, gets your attention. Synchronicity bypasses logic. It speaks in symbols, in patterns. It's not rational, it's meaningful. The ego lives in time and reason. The unconscious, it lives in eternity. When these two align, especially in moments of emotional intensity or transition, something sacred happens. Your outer world begins to reflect your inner truth. Jung told the story of a woman in therapy. She dreamed of a golden scarab, a beetle symbolizing transformation in Egyptian myth. As she shared her dream, a scarab-like beetle tapped at the window behind Jung. He caught it, handed it to her, and that moment shattered her defenses. Synchronicity had pierced through her rational mind. When you're in alignment with the self, these impossible moments appear everywhere. You think of someone, they call. You're about to give up, and a stranger says exactly what you needed to hear. You change plans at the last second, and narrowly avoid disaster. This isn't superstition, it's symbolic reality. A deeper intelligence using outer events to mirror your inner path. Jung said, "It's not about proof, it's about meaning." Synchronicities increase during emotional intensity, during stress, grief, or awakening. They arrive when the ego is most fragile. They remind you, you are held. The self operates like a compass. It won't micromanage your every move, but it will correct your course. If you stray too far from your path, you'll feel it. In dreams, in discomfort, even in illness. And when you return to alignment, synchronicities start lighting your way again. Let's take a real-life example. A man going through a painful divorce kept seeing the number 111, white feathers, and recurring dreams of walking through a doorway. He ignored them at first, until one day, after a harsh message from his ex-wife, he walked outside to clear his mind. A stranger passed him and simply said, "Don't worry, peace is coming soon." He never saw that man again. But that message felt divine, not logical, but deeply, symbolically true. Jung would interpret the feathers as symbols of angelic presence. The doorway, a threshold of transformation, and the stranger, a messenger archetype. Messengers appear in myths when the hero is about to give up. They don't fix things, they reassure, and that reassurance is protection. It tells your psyche, you're not alone. People protected by a higher power begin to develop a myth for their life. They stop seeing events as random. They start to see a story unfolding, a sacred story, and synchronicities, they're the punctuation marks, the universe whispering, "Keep going." But Jung also warned, don't become obsessed. Not every red light is a sign. Not every coincidence is sacred. The key is emotional resonance. If a moment grips your soul, lingers in your heart, or awakens something within, that's when it matters. Synchronicity doesn't prove God, it proves meaning. And meaning gives you the courage to move forward when logic says, give up. Timing is everything. Synchronicity often delivers what you need exactly when you need it. Not before, not after. Jung believed this showed that our psyche is not isolated. It's connected to the collective unconscious, and maybe to something divine. A greater intelligence beyond time and space. Part 3. Sign 2. You've survived what should have destroyed you. There's a truth echoed in many lives. Some people survive what should have broken them. Abuse, betrayal, addiction, war, loss, grief. They don't come out unscarred, but they come out different, awake, resilient, wiser in ways no textbook can teach. In Jungian psychology, this isn't random. This is archetypal. When the ego collapses and you still survive, something greater has stepped in. Not willpower, not luck. The self rising from the unconscious to protect the soul's integrity. This is divine protection, not from the outside, but from within. May shatter, but within that breaking, the archetypal structures begin to stir. The hero archetype may emerge, or the inner healer, or the divine child. These are not fictional roles. They are psychological energies that activate when survival is at stake. One of Jung's most radical insights was that the unconscious is not merely a storage unit for repressed memories. It is also the source of transformation. When someone survives severe trauma and emerges with new wisdom, vision, or empathy, it's not because they ignored the pain. It's because the psyche went to work at a mythic level. The pain became the portal. The destruction became initiation. What was meant to kill the ego ended up awakening the self. Let's look at the symbolic structure of this process. In mythology, the hero's journey always includes a descent into darkness, the underworld, the abyss. This isn't just narrative, it mirrors psychological reality. You lose everything. The old self dies. You fall into despair. But then something unexpected happens. Help arrives. Part 5, Sign 4, continued and concluded. When the inner world becomes sacred ground. Sometimes, silence becomes the greatest sanctuary. You sit alone, no distractions, no noise, just you and the breathing presence of your soul. And in that stillness, something ancient stirs. You begin to feel the truth that's hard to explain, that you are not just healing, you are being remade. And what's remaking you is not the world, it's something higher, something older than time, something deeper than thought. It's the voice that comes before language, the guide that appears before reason, the light that glows before sunrise. You begin to realize your pain was not punishment, it was preparation. Your solitude was not isolation, it was sacred training. And the strange symbols, the recurring dreams, the unshakable gut instincts, they weren't accidents, they were divine instructions. You're being taught how to feel the world again, not with your skin, but with your soul. You're being shown that divine protection isn't a barrier between you and the world. It's a bridge between you and yourself. Because the greatest protection of all is knowing who you truly are. And when you know that, when you finally remember the fullness of your being, you become unshakable. Not because life stops hurting, but because your spirit stops breaking. You've seen the storm, you've walked through the fire, but you're still standing. And now, you carry fire within you. You speak less, but every word carries weight. You move slower, but every step is sacred. You trust less, but when you do trust, it's unshakable. This is not weakness, this is refinement. This is the divine chiseling away all that is false, so only truth remains. So if your life has felt like a riddle lately, know this. Riddles are only given to those ready for revelation. Symbols only follow those destined to decode. And divine guidance only comes to those who are finally willing to listen. Maybe it's not that the world is going crazy. Maybe it's that you're finally becoming sane in a world that has forgotten how to listen to the soul. So take a deep breath. Look back at your journey, not with sorrow, but with sacred eyes. Everything that broke you, taught you. Everything you lost, led you. Everything that didn't make sense, shaped you. And now here you are. Not the same person who started this journey, but someone new. Someone deeper. Someone more whole. You are the living proof that what tries to destroy the soul can awaken it instead. And this awakening is the final sign. When you begin to live, not from fear, not from ego, but from the center of your spirit. That is when the divine no longer needs to protect you from the world, because you've become the protection. You've become the fire, you've become the light. And now you don't just walk through the world, you bless it. Reality, it manifests in unconsciousness, in willful ignorance, in repression, in the refusal to confront one's shadow. Evil can appear with fear in external forms, people, situations, systems, but its root is psychological. And the more unconscious a person is of their own shadow, the more vulnerable they are to manipulation, deception, and harm. But when someone begins to live in alignment with their authentic self, when they confront their inner darkness, integrate their wounded parts, and live from the deeper truth of their soul, they become harder to manipulate. Not because they are vicious or aggressive, but because they are aware. Jung observed that awareness itself is a form of protection. To see clearly is to become unentangled from hidden agendas. The light of consciousness exposes the forces that would otherwise operate in secret. And this light often functions preemptively. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A feeling that someone's energy is off. A gut instinct that says, "Don't trust that smile." A nudge to leave a conversation before it turns. When you are protected by a higher power, this awareness is amplified. Not because you are better than others, but because you've chosen to live in truth, and truth attracts clarity. Evil, on the other hand, thrives in distortion, illusion, and projection. When you refuse to play those games, when your inner world is congruent, evil has no hook to grab onto. People under this kind of protection often avoid disaster without realizing it. They may leave relationships right before betrayal is revealed. They may lose interest in a project that later turns out to be corrupt. They may feel inexplicable resistance to an opportunity that everyone else is chasing and find out later that it was a trap. These are not accidents. These are signs that the unconscious, guided by a higher intelligence, has intervened. This guidance often works through inner resistance. You may want something desperately, but for some reason it won't manifest. Doors close, things fall through. You feel blocked.